Marcia Black is an archivist in Detroit.
I see myself as a community archivist, so really rooted in preserving and sharing stories that are related to communities that I care about and, leveraging that work as a way to create a future that is more caring and considerate and centering these communities that I'm a part of.
Lately, Marcia has been recording the stories and history of Detroit's Black Bottom neighborhood in a growing digital collection called the Black Bottom Archive.
So, Black Bottom Archive is a living community archive that is dedicated to sharing and preserving Black Detroit stories.
For generations, Black Bottom was a thriving hub of Black life and culture in downtown Detroit. That is, until the I-375 interstate cut right through the heart of the neighborhood in the name of urban renewal. The community was never the same, and that disruption is still felt today.
In the spring of 2024, Marcia started attending meetings for a Kresge-supported initiative called the I-375 Reparative Roundtable.
The Reparative Roundtable is a collective of folks with different experiences and expertise and positionality who are coming together with the shared interest and goal of making sure that repair is centered in future development related to this 375 project and repair specifically towards the harm that was done to the displaced residents and community members who lived in Black Bottom and Paradise Valley.
Earlier that year, Marcia had attended a preliminary meeting hosted by the Michigan Department of Transportation. It was at that meeting that she noticed something.
While I was in that space, I noticed an absence of Black elders, which for me communicated to us that there was a lack of presence of folks who have direct lived experience and connection to Black Bottom and Paradise Valley.
In that moment, Marcia saw a very real opportunity for her archives, and more importantly, her relationships with those Black elders to be put into action for the community.
As storytellers and archivists, we're really familiar with this idea that history is always present. And so it felt like an important intervention to bring those voices into the space and to help facilitate that, understanding that a lot of the folks who have that lived experience are elders and aren't necessarily, these spaces aren't always accessible to them, but that doesn't have to be the barrier that keeps them from participating. So for us, it became a question of, how can we leverage the work that we're already doing to bring them, into discussions about the future, which is not something that we're always asking older folks about, which is, based on your life, what would you like to see in the future?
Marcia's community-led approach to archiving has brought community elders who were directly impacted by the construction of I-375 into the decision-making process for neighborhood repair and reimagining what the future of the I-375 corridor in Detroit could look like.
This is PathBreakers, a show about what it takes to cut through the noise, the red tape, and all of the other obstacles to progress.
I'm Tracy Pearson, and I work on the communications team at the Kresge Foundation.
And I'm Jamie Bennett, and I work at the intersection of arts, culture, and equitable community development. On each episode of PathBreakers, we'll talk to someone different, someone who's forging a new way forward in their community.
Today, we're talking with Marcia Black about the intersection of archival practice, community memory, and social justice, and how her work demonstrates that preserving cultural history can be a tool for Black liberation and community healing, particularly in addressing historical displacement and erasure in Detroit. I can kick this one off. Awesome. Hi, Marcia. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, Marcia, I'm a native Detroiter, West Side, and I am familiar with Black Bottom and some of the work that you're doing. But my co-host, Jamie, is to the north of us in Canada, and he is not as familiar. So I wanted to see if you wouldn't mind introducing him verbally to Black Bottom and the work that you're doing in your role.
Yeah, I always love to start with this quote from Jamon Jordan, who's the City of Detroit historian. And he describes Black Bottom as acre by acre, one of the most historically significant and culturally rich neighborhoods in Michigan. And a part of that is because Black Bottom has meant so many things to so many different types of communities. And so, as the waves of migration brought in communities like the Greek community and Polish community and Jewish communities, and then as the Great Migration began for Black folks who were in the South and starting to travel to places up north in the Midwest, Black Bottom was the neighborhood that those folks were able to kind of get their start in. And so, we really think about it as like the heart of Black Detroit history and culture. A part of that is not just because Black people love each other, which we do. It also was in response to the segregation and racism that they were experiencing here. A lot of that was happening through housing in the form of redlining and racial covenants that limited their mobility of being able to settle in other places in the city. And, as the suburbs were becoming established and housing was expanding, other communities that were not Black had those opportunities to kind of spread out, and that's what led to it becoming the majority Black community that we talk about today. And so, because of urban renewal that started to kick off in the 50s and the 60s, that community became one of many that was labeled a slum and a place that wasn't worth existing. And this idea that like progress required that this community not existing anymore was kind of the mindset at the time. So as a result, Black Bottom was destroyed. That process started in the early 50s, and took about 2 decades for Black Bottom and Paradise Valley collectively to be destroyed. And so what stands there today are projects like Lafayette Park, which is like a world-renowned architectural project. But also on the flip side, as I've done research, like I've seen ads and things that refer to it as like a suburb in the city of Detroit, and saw ads that, pictured only white families and not reflective of the community that was there and that was displaced. So, what we try to focus on here at Black Bottom Archives is countering this narrative of Black Bottom being a slum and uplifting like some of the rich histories and impact that we know that community made on Detroit. So, in addition to it being a majority Black community, it was, a place of a lot of Black led important institutions. Second Baptist Church, which also was a key stop in the Underground Railroad, is located in the Black Bottom community in what is now mostly called Greektown. Hastings Street and St. Antoine were like major concentrations of Black businesses. So thinking about Black hair salons and ice cream shops and pharmacies. Also, like one of Detroit's first Black-owned hospitals was located in Black Bottom, the Dunbar Hospital. And so, yeah, there were just many institutions, hundreds of businesses at its peak. I didn't mention Paradise Valley, but Paradise Valley is located to the north of Gratiot. And so when people talk about the Harlem Renaissance and like the arts and culture peak period of Harlem, like Detroit had a similar movement that was happening predominantly in Paradise Valley. So also, it's all these like understories that exist. It's a very rich history. I feel like I'm giving like a very like surface level entry, but I want to finish by saying also home to some really iconic Detroit people. So Coleman A. Young grew up in Black Bottom, was a major advocate of making sure that that community was remembered. Irma Henderson also was a Black Bottom resident. Joe Lewis was a Black Bottom resident. Um, Ralph J. Bunch. It's just some very like distinct, you wouldn't think of those connections, but I think that just gives an example of how impactful that community has been to people, which counters a lot of like what the story was told around why that community shouldn't exist anymore.
And Marcia, I think Tracy and I both want to spend most of the conversation talking about that rich history. But before we do that, it wasn't just the urban renewal, it wasn't just the housing redlining, it was also some transportation choices that the city of Detroit made. You know, theoretically, transportation infrastructure, highways and stuff, is meant to connect communities. And particularly in the United States, particularly in cities, particularly in Black communities, transportation infrastructure has been used to divide and erase. And so there's a little something in Detroit today called I-375. And can you just talk about that piece of it and talk folks through what that is and how we should think about that?
So yeah, I-375, 75, and how those projects came to be was not unique. It was something that was happening across the nation. But like you mentioned, 375 and 75 and these projects were kind of marketed as a thing that could connect communities, but actually ended up doing the complete opposite. That also those highways were not constructed with back and forth movement of like Detroiters are going to the suburbs and the folks in the suburbs are coming to the city. A lot of our transportation infrastructure, even today, seems to be geared more towards catering to folks that are not here, but come here and have the ability to spend money, and like that being seen as something that's more important of meeting the needs of the folks that have that capital to spend versus meeting the needs of folks that live in the city. And so, yeah, I think it's important to say that when we're talking about Black Bottom and the community of folks that existed there before this project in the final days before urban renewal destroyed that community, that it was a working class community of folks. So a part of the significance of Black Bottom as being a place where my pharmacist, my hospital, my church, my school, my favorite restaurants are all within walking distance. And that's a lot of what we heard from folks in during the oral history collection that we've done, is like that loss of community, of being able to get what you need within your community and not being forced to traverse to all these different places to meet your needs, which is something that hasn't fully been replaced, I think, for a lot of Black Detroiters. That's still not an experience that we've had in the most recent years.
I think that's so interesting because I know a lot of communities design with that goal in mind of the 5 minute neighborhood where you don't have to leave. You can get your pharmacy, your doctor, your dry cleaners, and to understand that that was explicitly extracted systemically as well. It just is sort of mind boggling that, the thing that you are trying to create today was explicitly taken out of Detroit and never recovered.
Well, and is there a chance, are we going to fix I-375? Can Detroit get it right going forward?
I think that's a complicated question. I think right is subjective. I think it depends on who you're talking to. I think there's a lot of different interest in this project. And so I think for me, when I'm thinking about getting it right, it's actively and intentionally engaging with the feedback and the wants and needs that folks in the community are communicating, and finding ways to honestly incorporate those things into the plan. So really pushing back on what I think is still a pretty common feeling of like these community engagement opportunities that are presented are performative, and that there's a secret plan that's already been developed that nobody's sharing, but we're kind of going through the motions. And so what I'm hoping is that what actually is developed feels reflective of what people said that they want, because I think that's also a morale booster. And like if we're saying we want to develop a culture where folks want to engage, then they have to see themselves reflected in the process and what the outcome ends up being. Because, yeah, a lot of folks have been kind of like beat down in different processes and also exhausted. Like these are working people that are coming to engage at a 5:30 meeting. So how do we make it known for them that we recognize the sacrifice that they made to be here and that we value what they say?
So so yeah, thinking about like the reparative roundtable, how does that work? What happens in those meetings?
Every roundtable is different. Every collective is different. I think so far what it's been has been is a series of conversations that, range from talking about the like nitty-gritty logistical mapping of the land, and, folks adding in their different insights based on their different experiences and positionalities. So whether you currently live in what was once Black Bottom, or you are a pastor at a church that has congregants that have connections to Black Bottom, or you're a business owner, like, everybody is coming with these different perspectives. So for me, I think the best way to describe it is kind of like hosting these spaces for us to be in critical thought and maybe sometimes struggling through differences together and figuring out, what's our best effort offerings that we can make to this moment in terms of what are the possibilities around what repair could look like in this project. So I'd say, like, nuts and bolts style, it really always kind of boils down to community conversations and relationship building, which I think relationship building ends up being key to any sort of people centered work. And I would say a lot of what the roundtable has been like is that. But then also, like translating that into something that can be actionable has been the other part of the roundtable. It's like, okay, once we have these conversations, how do we translate, what our values are, what our alignments are in a way that can be actionable and beneficial to the community that we say
Yeah.
we're looking to advocate for.
Yeah. Well, I'm not supposed to admit this, I think, but Tracy and I both secretly have a favorite episode of the series, and you're mine because I am both the son and grandson of librarians. So librarians, archivists, everyone who holds our stories are my people. Talk to us a little bit about the archive. What is this? Why do we need it? What kind of stuff does it hold?
Yeah, so Black Bottom Archives was founded in 2015, and it wasn't founded as an archive in the traditional sense, but was founded coming more from the perspective of filling the gap of records that didn't exist. So what we found is like through our life cycle, we've actually developed our own archive. We started off as a digital publication, we had a podcast, we had a Black business directory, and all of those things can still be found on our website. And I like to talk about that because you wouldn't necessarily think about those things as an archive. Oftentimes, the first thing that comes to mind are like the paper records and the old photos. But it's important for us to understand that we're actively a part of creating history. And so we don't have to look outside of ourselves in 10 to 20 years ago in order for us to feel like it's a history worth documenting. And that is actually super important for us to be doing that work actively as we're generating these things. Because as you get older, your memory changes, you know? So the context that you have right now, you might not ever have again because you're absorbing and learning so many things throughout your life. So we really try to encourage people to expand their thinking around what archiving looks like. With that in mind, like as our organization developed, obviously we were directly inspired by the story of Black Bottom, and that's why we're named Black Bottom. And so as our work continued, we met elders and we were having these intergenerational conversations that made it more clear that we needed to do some more intentional archival work that for us has looked like oral history collection. So
Mm.
trying to add the voices of folks that often aren't represented. So our Black Bottom Street View exhibit, which is a part of what inspired our Black Bottom Digital Archive, was developed in 2018 by Emily Cudel, who's an architect. And so she found these photos in the Burton Historical Collection that documented the eminent domain process.
Mhm.
So before they destroyed the community, they took photos to kind of detail what the landscape looked like as part of their plan. And so those photos are like some of the remaining photos that we have that document that community. And we always love to talk about the contradiction of having to use materials that weren't generated with the purpose of preserving the community, but with the purpose of, planning to destroy the community. So for us, it's been really beautiful to see how we can retool things like that to tell a story, to have folks who lived in that and engage with those photos and feel seen and feel remembered and honored. But what is still missing from that are the voices of the folks who had those lived experiences. So for us, it felt really important to,
Yeah.
one, acknowledge that history is not that far behind us. And so we're looking at Black and white photos, but these are your aunties, these are your neighbors. This is the lady at the grocery store, Bert's Warehouse. Like all of these folks are still alive. This is not a history that is so far removed that we can't still be actively working to preserve it. So our digital archive, the bulk of it looks like the oral histories that we've recorded. But also we have been able to develop this really beautiful digital map as part of our Sankofa research project that allows you now to see a high-res zoomable version of a map that gives you a view of the landscape of Black Bottom and Paradise Valley before they were destroyed. And now you can also compare and contrast what that landscape looks like then versus today. And that's important for us because, I think a part of the 375 conversation has brought up questions around what was lost. And there's so many different ways to answer that question. And for us, we really love to think about like visually creative, like how can we engage with the new technology that's being created that we know like a lot of the younger generations are learning their things on the internet, right? So like, how do we combine the old with the new? Like the oral history and like that tradition that is a very deep tradition with the technologies that exist now to kind of do some intergenerational branching. So that map, our plans for it is to start to map some of the businesses and also to map some of the oral histories. And yeah, that was a lot of words, but
I love that. And I know Tracy wants to jump in, but before she does, for any of the listeners who don't know Sankofa, that word, will you just give us a couple sentences on what Sankofa means? Because I think it's such a beautiful part of your approach.
yeah. So Sankofa makes reference to a West African Adinkra symbol and concept that the direct interpretation or the literal interpretation is to go back and get it. And so it's this idea of the importance of remembering our history in order to build a better future. And so the visualization of the Sankofa symbol is so beautiful. And honestly, if you live in Detroit, a lot of people have probably seen that symbol on people's front gates, like the ironclad gates with those designs. So there's like two versions where it's kind of like a heart version that kind of loops at the bottom, but then there's also the bird version that is visualized in our logo where the bird is reaching back with an egg on its back. So yeah, it's, again, like really important for us to like stay grounded in our roots and also like bring all of these things into conversation with today because we know that history is cyclical. It's not a one-stop thing. It's always influencing everything that we do.
I love that. Go back and get it. What are the answers we already had and we forgot?
I'm really interested in your archival work. How does that intersect with your involvement in the roundtable?
Yeah, I think the intersection is that through the work that we're doing with oral history collection, it puts us in the position to have these one-off meetings and relationship building with folks that have those direct connections. And so I think for us, it's always kind of amplifying what's been shared with us and, continuing to kind of carry that message into rooms that folks might not be able to have access to. So I think, the intersection has been amplifying and teaching the history of Black Bottom and Paradise Valley, and then also bringing those conversations and the things that we're discovering through the oral history collection into those meeting spaces and finding ways for that to be impactful and influential to the process and what will come of, this 30 acres of land.
I think it's really beautiful how you all are using conversation as that means of going back and get it. Being able to sit in conversation with your elders is such a gift, and there's so much history there. When you talk to people and you all have those exchanges, what has it meant for them to be able to do that?
It's honestly, that's probably the most rewarding part of the work is like when I have conversations and when I'm sharing the interview with people. And so a part of our process is we record, and then before we publish it, we give them the opportunity to see the edited version and to give us feedback if they want us to change anything. So in those moments where I send them the video and I'm like, do you have any feedback? And they see it for the first time. And the reactions have been like, wow, this is so amazing. Like, I've never seen myself like this. I can't believe like I'm a part of history. Thank you. It's just very like feeling seen, feeling respected, feeling valued enough that somebody is taking the time to sit with you, to ask you questions, to edit this video that then becomes a part of their archive. Like a lot of folks I think are most excited about participating in this project because now they have something that they can share with their community, with their family, with their grandkids, and like finding a way to just like have that connection and then like seeing yourself as a part of a bigger story. I think if anything, I think the feeling seen aspect has been a lot of what folks have communicated around what feels most impactful for them, which feels impactful for me because I think that's a first step of recognizing that your story is worth being preserved, is like feeling valued and feeling seen. So I'm happy that we're being able to add to that experience for elders. That a lot of elders, I think that's a part of the getting older process in our society that isn't so good, is that as folks get older, they're often getting overlooked. They're often not getting as much engagement. And so creating these pathways for us to build these intergenerational relationships is really, really important to the survival of our community.
Mm.
I think Jamie had a really interesting question when we were sort of digging into Black Bottom about ancestral knowledge and innovation. Um, I won't do it justice. So, Jamie, I'm gonna let you tee that up. But that's where I felt like, oh my goodness, this ancestral knowledge and it would, going back and getting it, but also informing what we do today.
Yeah, I've noticed that so much of philanthropy, so many mayors, so many leaders are obsessed with innovation, something new, something different, something all of that. But not enough of them, I think, are focused on traditional knowledge. And, ancestral knowledge is just innovation with a track record. We know what it looks like for Detroit to be home to a thriving Black community because it was that. And I think that there are a lot of answers in your archives, in the memories of Detroiters, in the folks you're talking about, to the questions that we're trying to sort out now. So just spend another minute, if you would, as we think about going back and getting it, what are some of the answers that Detroit already has to the problems it's trying to solve anew today?
I think the answer is a part of that folks are the experts of their lived experiences, that the best solutions are going to come from within the community. And a lot of what we've heard across the interviews is that community relationships and those bonds, and honestly, not even the self-sufficiency, but the communal sufficiency that they were able to create, were like outside of even the institutions that I named, of like the grocery store and the pharmacies, like having a neighbor that has a community garden that, if you need tomatoes or you need potatoes or you need things to kind of help you get to the next month, that those are relationships that exist. And so a lot of what we've heard from folks is like those bonds are a lot of what made Black Bottom feel like home to them. And a lot of what they end up grieving the most is like the loss of those relationships. And also like how important relationships and having those with your neighbors are to the health of your community, and what it means to destroy that and how that impacts future generations. So I think for me, like I had this conversation at one of our programs recently where someone was, talking about the climate of what's happening in the world today, the things we're facing around increased pricing, issues around just lack of stability overall. And so, someone asked at this meeting, like, what does history have to offer to how we think about how to survive these times? And for me, a lot of that instability was also, I think, descriptive of what Black folks were experiencing at that time as a result of these things that made it so that they had limited opportunity to go to these places. But how they were able to thrive in spite of not having the same sort of investment is through their relationships to each other, through the care, through the sharing of resources, through developing the institutions that you need, right? Like we are not able to go to these hospitals. So what do? We make a Black hospital, and then we have Black doctors that want to be in these Black hospitals. To me, I think that is a lot of what this moment today requires. Like I mentioned, history is cyclical, and so it's important for us to know, like you said, that this existed. Like these things that we need today existed at some point in time. And I think creatively for sure, but I am a believer in the words of Octavia Butler, there is nothing new under the sun but new suns. And so, yeah, we truly are a reflection of the love and visionary imaginations that our ancestors had.
How do you sort of bring together the world of technical archivism and then sort of the historical significance of what you're doing? So there's a technical piece to all of this, and you have the experience to do that work, but then also there's the sort of humanity in it. And so how have you brought both of those things together?
I think for me, it's always been important that whatever we do, whatever technology, whatever processes that we're using are accessible and able to be replicated. So what's been important for me is like the things that we do are something that I can teach. If we can't teach the tool, then we probably shouldn't be using the tool. And that's a part of the like self-sustainability aspect of not outsourcing our needs and our responsibilities to other folks and kind of being at the whim of that, but really taking control over the process. And that means, like, honestly, a lot of slowing down. Like, there's ways that we could do this work much quicker by outsourcing it to somebody that's more skilled, that's going to use their system or use some technology. But there's so much more lost when we don't choose to take time to slow down and nurture and teach that skill. So for me, that has been my approach and like how I've decided what to use and how to do the work. And then I think a major part of like the technological aspect and the relational aspect of it all is like thinking about consent and like how we're holding the people that are a part of this process. So, I've had experiences where I've done storytelling where it's like, okay, you tell the story and then they take it and then they publish it and like that's it, and that's a way to do it. And like that happens pretty frequently. But like if you're trying to do it in a community centered, love centered way, it requires slowdowns in that process to like meet people where they're at in their rhythm, which also I want to say in the Midwest really means that you're not doing much during winter.
Mm.
Because if we're also talking about working with elders, they are not coming outside. The sun goes down at 5 p.m. Dinner was eaten at 3:30.
And they're in the house.
Yep.
So it's just even just being in tune with the natural rhythm, being okay with that, and being in tune with my pace and their pace, because it's a really personal thing. I've heard people have like cried in oral histories and shared things that I know have been traumatic for them to have to recall. And those are the types of conversations that I can't, just try to check off of a list and have for the sake of having. I really want to make sure that people feel held and not just a part of a process and not a product.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about navigating the emotional toll of doing memory work that often deals with trauma, displacement, and systemic violence. Like, how do you take care of yourself when you're doing this work?
Ancestral veneration is really important to me. And, I try to think about the relationships I have to ancestors as like both the blood ancestors that I have, but also people that I admire, like Mama Joanne Watson, Mama Irma Henderson, who's a part of why I even got my first experience in an archive. Many, many people that I'm not naming that I think, again, understanding the impact of history and the influence it has today, when I'm able to kind of situate myself as a small part of that process, as making a small contribution and adding and pulling from the lineage of folks that have done this work before me, kind of helps to, I think, give me the grounding to like be in that space and kind of hold some of what, it's an exchange, like it's an energy exchange. Someone's sharing something traumatic, you're feeling the thing, but like I can't hold that thing for you. And I don't even think that's what people are asking when they're sharing those things. I think it's, again, just the space to be seen, to be heard, to feel valued. And I offer that. I hold the thing to an extent, but I really try to. I think a lot of what can make it complicated is when you want to fix everything and you just can't fix everything and you can't be everything to everyone. And so again, like when I'm able to see myself as one small speck in the universe trying to make my impact, it really helps to like get me out of that mindset of like they experienced this really traumatic thing and I need to find a way to fix it. And it's like, that's not my role, actually. Like, I think my role sometimes simply is to just hold space and be present. And yeah.
And Marcia, that is your role. That is your job, to hold space, but you're also a future ancestor, right? And when the children, the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren come along, what do you want them to be remembering about you? What do you want them to be remembering about your work? What do you want them to come back and get from you?
That's so funny that you asked that, because I ask my storytellers that at the end, like, how do you want to be remembered? And yeah, I think I want them to know that, one, I think history is important, that I think them remembering their history, preserving the history that they're creating right now is important. I think I would want them to know that if you want to have the impact that you want to have in whatever you're doing, you're going to be most successful when you're choosing to be rooted in community, to finding ways to build relationships and not kind of like this mindset of like competition and like I have to do it on my own and like that's a measure of success. but like seeing a measurement of success of like how you show up for community and how the impact that you've been able to have. And then I think I just also generally would want them to feel pride about being themselves. I would want to add to that sense of like, you should feel proud to be a Black person. Like, you should not be ashamed of your history. You should be really proud of yourself, and love yourself. And whatever that looks like for you is like just fine. It's going to look differently in so many ways. But I think that aspect of loving yourself is so important when a lot of what we're doing right now is combating narratives that have been detrimental to people's self-identity. And so I'm hoping that the stories that I'm telling today and that I continue to tell help to add to this work of folks seeing themselves as valuable and worth remembering.
I think that's the through line in all of this. There is value. Your life is valuable. Your experiences are valuable. And that's one of the things that's so beautiful about the work that you are doing, the acknowledgement of humanity.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So we have a sort of a lightning round of questions. It's sort of a back and forth, really short answer, sort of quick first thing that pops into your mind. And if it's okay, we would sort of like, it's just 10 of them. So we wanted to just get your responses on.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. I'll go first. What internet tabs do you have open right now?
Google, everything Gmail right now.
If you need to get grounded in a moment, what's the thing you do to ground yourself?
If I have access to nature, touch a tree, touch some grass.
If you had to describe Black Bottom as if it was like a personality type, what would it be?
Oh my goodness. Aretha Franklin. Just grand and bold and unforgettable.
Love that. Coffee or tea?
Tea.
What's the song that when it comes on, you have to dance?
Dance Tonight by Lucy Pearl is the perfect ballrooming song.
Absolutely.
Perfect.
Love that. Lions, Pistons, Tigers, or Red Wings?
Pistons.
Period. What's your childhood Coney Island?
Oscars.
Oscar? Right. Okay.
Oh.
I know exactly where you are in the city just by that. Go ahead.
I love that. Are you an early bird or a night owl?
Early bird.
One piece of Detroit history you wish more people knew about?
Oh my goodness. Irma Henderson. Okay. The first Black woman on city council, the first Black woman city council president that also ran against Coleman A. Young in a mayoral election and also led the fight against redlining.
Think about Detroit. Think about your city. What's the first word that comes to mind?
Exquisite.
Exquisite. Well, this was an exquisite conversation. You like what I did there? Very clever.
I do.
Very podcasty. But Marcia, thank you so much for the work you do. Thank you so much for taking the time to share it with us. Thank you for the smile you brought to this conversation. Thank you for all you shared with us. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you both for having me. It's been great talking to you.
Marcia Black is a Detroit-based archivist, curator, and cultural preservationist. We put a link to the Black Bottom archives in our show notes.
PathBreakers is produced by the Kresge Foundation, which was founded in 1924 with a mission to promote human progress. Today, Kresge works to expand equity and opportunity in America's cities.
Read the stories of all of this season's PathBreakers and learn about our grant-making and social investing work in Detroit, Memphis, New Orleans, Fresno, and cities across the U.S. at kresge.org. To hear more stories from the PathBreakers, please be sure to subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts.
Our producers are Juliet Heinley and Zach Rosen. Managing editor is Krista Yankee. Show art by Rochelle Baker and creative direction by Alejandro Herrera.
And a big thank you to my colleagues on the Detroit program for lifting up Marcia and speaking her name as a truly phenomenal pathbreaker. We'll talk to you all next week.